I've been playing strategy RPGs for the better part of my existence. From the moment I first got a Game Boy Advance, I would gravitate toward games like Final Fantasy Tactics Advance and Fire Emblem Sacred Stones. Then when I got a PSP, it were games like Disgaea, which when I asked my mom to buy it for me, I didn't even know it was a strategy game. Younger me just thought the characters looked cool. There was always something that just oddly clicked and kept bringing me back to these types of games, even to the point where I still play them now and can find them extremely relaxing while at the same time challenging. All of this to say, I've had a big problem recently. You see, I fell in love with this game called Triangle Strategy not too long ago. Man, let me tell you, this game takes me back to those younger days, sitting on the bottom bunk, laying upside down, playing with my PSP. I get such a rush of nostalgia when I play this game that it's become one of my favorite things in the world. But there are others online who don't even think Triangle Strategy is good, or not even a challenging game. So what are these knaves shilling, you ask? Tactics Ogre Reborn. Alright, I'll check it out. With this series, I plan to pick some categories common for strategy RPGs and measure the two games against each other to try and see which one is objectively better. Now, I know it's impossible for me as a diehard fan of Triangle Strategy not to be subjective, so feel free to take everything I say with a grain of salt. Now, there's been a bit of discourse online regarding these two games. I was scrolling through comments on various internet forums, finding myself growing increasingly frustrated with the dismissal of Triangle Strategy, with it being referred to as a casual experience. So I've just finished spending around 90 hours with Tactics Ogre, beating the game once and doing a little side content to officially try and objectively decide which game is better. With that said, let's dive in. Section 1. Menus. Menus. The first thing you do when you go to any restaurant is look at the menu, an experience everyone has to go through at some point, unless of course you're one of the people I deal with on a daily basis that come to my job and ask for everything that isn't on the menu.
100 meatballs, 100 coffees, 55 wings, 55 shakes, 55 pancakes, 55 pasta.
What I'm trying to say is that menus are very important and are with you through your entire experience with the game. Well, how are the menus in Tactics Ogre? The most confusing jumbled Excel spreadsheet that I have ever had the mispleasure of fumbling through. I spent like 100 hours with this game and still struggled to navigate through the menus. With all the various character slots and options you can interact with, it can be very easy to get lost. Every unit has item slots, spell slots, class-specific slots, finishing move slots, and not to mention all the regular equipment slots. You're now loaded with the task of keeping track of everything on all units at all times. It may not sound like a lot at first, but when you're cycling through 30 plus units, each with their own crafted by you loadouts, it becomes a bit daunting. I found myself running into issues, for instance, where I would have a battle with zombies, so I decked out my healers with Exorcism and Sanctuary, abilities that are only useful when dealing with the undead. When I finish that battle, I go into the next only to realize I've forgotten to take off their undead-defying abilities. And there's no undead. Now, this shouldn't be an issue, but the game doesn't have the option to restart the battle. Your only option is to reload your last save, which may or may not have been right before the battle. The game does have an autosave feature to help combat this, but I personally didn't find it very forgiving. It was always sending me back further than I would have preferred. Add in things like having to access the Warren report constantly to not miss out on extra content, and suddenly navigating this game has become a little bit of a bitch. On the other hand, I found myself appreciating Triangle Strategy's simpler approach to navigating things like the world map and menus. Let's consider for a second that the world map itself is essentially a menu. With Triangle Strategy's world map, you're only able to interact with either the next part of the story or a side story. I could see this being potentially boring for some, but when you take into account that Tactics Ogre has this jambalaya of a world map, your options are either simplicity or just getting plain lost. Not to say that I hated it, but at some point in the game it did begin to have too many places on the map. This could cause a player to easily become overwhelmed, especially if you zoom out. Unfortunately, the places only have names once you hover over them. I couldn't even tell you all of the countries on Earth's map, let alone this one. Before I end this section, I just want to touch on how the equipment menu in Triangle Strategy works. Every character gets 2 equipment slots, which help keep things simple. The equipment in Triangle Strategy plays more of an augmentation role. For instance, there's the Vanguard Scarf that lets the equipped character go first in battle. This item can be very good for an aggressive strategy or setting up a strong defense. There's also elemental amulets that provide resistance to its corresponding element, or even items that make you immune to status effects. I feel like this simplification of the equipment system helps engage the player with focusing on the strategy of combat. Speaking of which, combat. These games are obviously similar in terms of how the combat is handled. However, the games really begin to define themselves as you spend more time with them. We've got the grid-based system with the tiles and the units and the tactics, pretty standard stuff. Both games have a turn order system that places units based on their speed stat, and have turn recovery bonuses based on what actions you did or didn't take during a turn. Why is this spy faster than the man on horseback? I don't know, but what I do know is that I appreciate the fact that when I go to end a character's turn in triangle strategy, it shows me where they're going to end up next in a turn order. Not only that, you can number all of the units on the battlefield by turn, making for easier planning. Imagine for a sec, you're playing a strategy game, and said game has a turn order that involves keeping track of like 25 plus units on the battlefield. Now imagine that game having no way of showing you who's going next past the first 18 units. Well, you don't have to, because Tactics Ogre makes this a reality. This may seem like a nitpick, but it's really not. Knowing when which unit will go plays a huge part in my decision making, and I'd imagine it's the same for most players. An actual nitpick I have is the way that experience points are handled. It's common in RPGs for players to take their underleveled party members and put them into battles with their stronger allies to level them up faster. Experience is usually awarded to all participants at the end of combat. This works for normal RPGs because the battles don't last very long. For a strategy game, this becomes a bit more of a problem. The battles are much longer, and as a result, you feel the effects of having a weaker unit in your group more harshly. You have the constant burden of planning around being down a unit and having a liability on the field. The game does try to ease this problem in the form of experience charms. Using one on a unit gives them a set amount of experience points depending on the charm's level. These are nice when you can get them, but they are given out sparingly. As far as I remember, you can only get them two ways. One is if all of the units you deploy meet the current level cap at the end of combat. The extra experience gets turned into charms. It seems to scale up the amount of experience you need each time, I assume to prevent players from farming charms early on. I personally find it kind of annoying to see experience points go wasted like that. The other way to get charms is as a reward for completing battles in the wacky endgame dungeon, the Hanging Gardens. I personally didn't use many charms in my playthrough in case I needed them later. As for triangle strategy, it were a lot simpler. Whenever a unit takes an action in battle, they are granted experience points. This means using an item, attacking enemies, or interacting with allies. All experience granted is scaled based on the unit's current level and the average level of the map. For instance, if you have a unit that's extremely underleveled, like Narv here, he gains a whole level from using Spark because the enemy he attacked is 10 levels higher than him. By the end of this battle, he's almost completely caught up, along with a few other units that I had to level up. This is why I really enjoyed this game's approach to grinding, because it felt efficient. What I could get done grinding for 30 minutes in Triangle Strategy would take me an hour in Tactics Ogre. I think I have a preference for the way experience is handled, possibly due to it being the norm in previous titles I've played. The feeling of having a character level up and learn a new ability on the fly is just so good. Another thing I'd like to talk about is Tactics Ogre's rock, paper, scissors type element system. Wind beats earth, earth beats lightning, you get the idea. What I enjoyed about this is that when you have an elemental advantage along with a class advantage, you can do a shit ton of damage and take a lot less. What would suck is when the boss had an elemental advantage. Aside from using weapon finishers, your disadvantaged units essentially do no damage to them. Speaking of which, I really enjoyed finishers. A lot of finishers came with different elemental properties, adding a bit more depth and flexibility to the combat. Even if you attack a unit with an element inherently stronger than yours, if your finisher is a stronger element, it will do more damage. This comes at the cost of a lot of MP, but it's almost always worth it in a pinch. Along with that, a lot of finishers actually come with status effects that almost always activate on normal enemy units. Characters unlock finishers for every 10 levels they gain in a weapon's proficiency. My Canopus had like 8 finishers. He was putting in work, let me tell you. The finishers were one of the finer points of combat, and I feel the same way about Triangle Strategy in this regard. Deciding to use a character's ultimate move in Triangle Strategy is a huge decision because it costs you a lot of resources in and out of combat. I'll talk about the outside aspect later, but while in combat, most characters' ultimate abilities cost about 4 TP, and to add to that, they're not all just physical attacks. In fact, all of the characters' ultimate abilities are unique to one another. Eridor has one of my favorite ultimate abilities in the game called King's Shield. What it does is taunts all enemies within 2 tiles with a 100% success rate for 1 turn, and until Eridor's next turn, he is immune to all damage. I'm explaining this shit like it's a Magic the Gathering card, but it's fucking amazing. This ability is great for things like stall tactics or just super tanking everything the enemy can throw at you. I like to pair this ability with an Amulet of Immunity because otherwise Eridor can still be hit with status effects like stun. As far as the quality of battles, both games have good battles with good maps. I honestly felt like Tactics Ogre was more of a mixed bag, but this might be due to the fact that there wasn't a difficulty setting. Early on I remember thinking the battles were easy, then I got to the map with Nybeth, and I was suddenly barely scraping by. The difficulty spikes were jarring, making me feel like the game would have benefited greatly from having a difficulty setting. Triangle Strategy has a difficulty setting. In fact, I played it on hard the entire way through, and well, it was fucking hard. The battle's difficulty scaled well, with each one being harder than the last. Triangle Strategy's battles were like going to Smash Burger and getting a nice juicy burger. Sure, it's a little pricey, but hey, they've got nice rosemary fries. Tactics Ogre's battles, on the other hand, were like going to McDonald's. Just about everybody knows and loves McDonald's. They're all over the place. It's fun, but you don't want to eat too much or else you'll get bloated and throw up that spicy McChicken like I always do. Ooh. What I mean to say is Tactics Ogre has combat bloat. With the heavy amount of battles, I felt myself getting burned out, which may have been due to their varying quality. I'd also like to mention that for some reason you can get into random battles with no heads up for a chance to prep or even save for that matter. I could be crossing the map to do some side content and suddenly I have to do some other side content, almost always involving undead. This happens again and again and again. The first time it was a cool novelty, the fourth time it was just downright annoying. I still find myself more fond of Triangle Strategy's approach to battles. Unlike Tactics Ogre, there is no permadeath in Triangle Strategy, but this in no way affects the difficulty of combat. I felt like the battles were overall more satisfying. With Tactics Ogre, the fact that I could revive my units within 3 of their turns took a lot of the tension of permadeath away. I'm sure this is a tricky thing to balance, but I only ever had one unit die permanently, and that's because I forgot to revive him. And I also forgot about the chariot. And I also forgot to save before the battle, so I just didn't think it was worth it to reset. It's just, I feel so locked in before I even start combat. It's like getting into a Pokemon battle with another trainer. There's no getting out of that shit. They won't even care if your grandma's in the hospital. I at the very least would have liked an option to restart the battle from the planning phase in case I took the wrong abilities, but I cannot. I wonder if it's because the developers felt like having that option would undercut the chariot system. I'm not sure, I just wish the game had it like Triangle Strategy does. In fact, at any point before the battle, I can make adjustments to my characters, do a little farming if need be, or even visit the shops. Which brings us to the next section. Shops. I still have my gripes about the encampment system, but I will say that I appreciated being able to access a shop at any time. It made a huge difference in my ability to competently prepare for combat. It also gets bonus points for having the in-universe explanation be that the traveling merchants are a part of your group, just like Path of Radiance. Tactics Ogre's shops can only be accessed in certain cities. This was a little annoying, but honestly I overall preferred Tactics Ogre's shop system. Surprising, I know. It was a nice, simple, streamlined experience. It was very snappy, responsive, and remembered that it was meant to be a shop. It really outshined Triangle Strategy, especially in the weapon upgrade aspect. Get this, if you were upgrading a weapon and the shop had the materials you needed for upgrade, you had the option to just buy everything you needed for the upgrade all at once. My eyes rolled back in my head from excitement when I saw this feature. I don't know why Jins couldn't just ask Lionel for some iron or have some available. He is a fucking blacksmith after all. All of the items you get in Triangle Strategy have some purpose, which means it's really hard to actually sell anything if you need extra funds. Now there's a bunch of loot in Tactics Ogre. I found it kinda lame at first, but then I realized it was nice being able to have things to sell. Plus, how can you not be put in a good mood when you hear the shopkeep say, "Oh, now there's a familiar face." Both games have extra shops, with Tactics Ogre being the cooler of the two. Triangle Strategy's extra shops are just a random merchant placed in the exploration phase. They sell some unique items, but for prices you likely would struggle to afford on a regular playthrough. Tactics Ogre has a cool secret shop run by a Weiss named Deneb. She sells rare items that you can't get in a normal shop, and some normal shop items at a discount. Along with all of that, you can actually recruit Deneb into your party. This would be really cool if it didn't require so many ridiculous, tedious steps to unlock her and her special class, which takes us into our next section, units. I'm gonna pick up where I left off, specifically with unit recruitment. In Tactics Ogre, there are some units that are so unbelievably complicated to recruit. I mean, just look at it. Dear Lord, are you seeing this shit right now? This is just one character. I'm convinced I would have an easier time learning how to jump rope while riding a unicycle and being punched in the stomach repeatedly. At least with that, there would be a clear path of progression. Now, this isn't the only ridiculously difficult character to recruit. In fact, there are many more. This one just stood out to me the most. Along with that, you can miss recruiting characters by razor-thin margins, which I only know because I was looking at a guide at times and fucked up. It was kind of frustrating, but I will at least recognize this problem is resolved with an in-game feature that you unlock once you beat the game. In Triangle Strategy, there are 6, technically 7, story recruitable characters. You'll only be able to get 2 of them in one playthrough. As for the other recruitable characters, they become available based on your conviction stats. Conviction is just an invisible stat that's measured based on how you play the game. When you meet certain conviction thresholds, you're able to access a character's story and recruit them. My only complaint about this is that there is a clear missed opportunity for a battle to be attached to recruiting the character. They could have accomplished world building and encouraged the player to use the new unit by showing them how they work in a battle scenario, instead of just adding them to the party for you to try later. Even if it were to take place of mental mock battles, I still feel like it would have been better overall. Green units. Green units. Let me tell you, green units overstay their welcome in Tactics Ogre, but overall have better AI than Triangle Strategies. Unless that green unit is Vice, in which case he'll run it down at the enemy. I really dislike that a majority of Tactics Ogre is spent with a guest unit in your party that you cannot control. It really puts a burden on my strategic planning because of course I'm doing my best to not let them die, but when I can't control their actions it makes that really hard. In my mind, they're just taking up space I could have had for another unit. Thankfully, Triangle Strategies green units are given higher stats to compensate for them being green. Dragan has an insane 5 movement as a mage, Exam has high defenses, and Maxwell is just overleveled. As for the classes, Triangle Strategy takes a unique approach with each character essentially being their own class while filling an archetype. For example, Serenoa is a basic lord, but he excels at control. With his ability to delay turns, attack from unique angles, and split the damage his allies take, you find yourself having a fighter capable of setting up great defensive positions. The fact that you're forced to use different characters and can't just stack the strongest class means that you have to make the best of each character's abilities. There is some customization to be had, and both games have a wide array for you to choose from. In Tactics Ogre case, it's like I mentioned before with all the spells and items. For Triangle Strategy, each character has a unique upgrade chart that you use materials you collect during the game in order to make them stronger. I know some people didn't enjoy the resource management aspect of Triangle Strategy, but I love it. I feel like it adds a fun extra layer to the game. A player would never be able to get enough materials to fully upgrade all of their units in one playthrough. This made me think about who and what I would upgrade a lot more. For instance, do I want to use my 1 silver to upgrade Serenoa or Roland's weapon? If I upgrade Serenoa's, do I want to use the quality iron I have to upgrade his Hawk Dive's range, or would I rather give him 5 extra damage? These minor tweaks really affect how your battles play out and open up more flexibility to the ways you can approach them. Kinda like a survival horror game. All of this makes me wish there was an option for New Game Plus, but where it starts you back at level 1 with all of the upgrade materials from the last playthrough. I might be in the minority, but I feel like a fresh hard mode save is harder than a New Game Plus playthrough. Before I end this section, I wanted to talk about one of my favorite units from Tactics Ogre, Lindol. Even in a fantasy world full of magic beasts, skeletons, and demons, there remains the uncontested equalizer, gun. Seriously, the Fusilier class is insanely strong and fun. He just shoots things and does big damage. You have to have a clear shot because line of sight is considered, but he does have an ability that lets him shoot through walls. This really helps him pick off those annoying backline targets. The only downside was that he was extremely slow, but that was remedied with my second favorite class, the Fairy. I love this little thing pretty much because all of its unique abilities revolve around kissing stuff. I'm serious, Selfless Kiss, Coquettish Kiss, Lingering Kiss. My personal favorite was the Lingering Kiss because it's really strong, and the description is hilarious.
A short-range ability that plants a passionate kiss on a single target, splitting the caster's HP with them, and reducing their RT to 0, allowing them to act immediately.
She would just follow Lindol around on the battlefield giving him sloppy kisses. It weirded everyone out. However, it did give him the power to put atonement in a bullet and send the final boss back to hell, so who am I to complain? These two games provide experiences that are very similar, but also very different. If I had to pick, I would obviously choose Triangle Strategy because I enjoyed the long cutscenes, the character designs were appealing to me, they were easy to tell apart, and things felt very distinct. The maps also provided a bigger challenge as far as employing tactics and making me think. Tactics Ogre starts off strong, but after a certain point it starts to feel like a slog, and I think that's what I find most interesting about these two games. One starts off admittedly painfully slow and picks up gradually without stopping as you play it. while the other starts off strong, then slowly starts to taper off towards the end. Some people appreciate a good slow burn, while the others only need a good first impression. At the end of the day, both of these games are good. As far as determining which one is better, I can only say that it'll boil down to personal taste, or maybe whichever one got to you first. So what about you? Have you played both games, and if so, which one do you think is better? Feel free to let me know in the comments down below. When I first started working on this, it was because some shitheads on the internet were bad-mouthing one of my favorite games over this Ogre title. Come to find out, fans of the Ogre games do this every time a new strategy game comes out. Unicorn Overlord came out not too long ago and I've just been loving it. Bought the Monarchs edition and have been sinking a lot of my free time into it. So I'm on Reddit just enjoying the community when I see this shit. Another fucking person shilling another fucking Ogre title. This time Ogre Battle 64. It's as if these same people are waiting in the wings for their opportunity to tell you about this 20-something-year-old game franchise. And you know what? I guess I'll play that one too.